The Beatles. They're a band that needs no introduction, so I won't give them one. Anywho, about 3 months back, my dad was clearing out some cabinet space when he came across some old CDs of his. He no longer owns a CD player, but I guess he holds on to them for old time's sake. Seeing as I do, he said I could go through them and pick out any that caught my eye. So I did. I came away with a good collection. No Need to Argue by the Cranberries, Modern Guilt by Beck, Reckoning by R.E.M., and every Beatles album. You heard that right. Included in my dad's old CDs was a box set of the Beatles' entire studio discography. As intimidating as it seemed at first, I just couldn't turn down the opportunity to own such a collection. It's at this point I should confess something. For most of my life prior to this, I wouldn't say I listened to much Beatles music. Obviously, I don't live under a rock, so I've encountered a good amount of their songs. I even have a favorite Beatle, although to avoid dividing my viewer base, I won't say who it is. Not verbally, at least. However, I didn't listen to too many songs in my own free time, and I wasn't really familiar with any deep cuts. Now that I had the box set on hand, I decided to amend that. I set my sights on listening to every studio album the Fab Four ever put out. Today, you will be joining me on that journey. Quick disclaimer. As some of you might know, up until Sgt. Pepper, all Beatles albums were released in different forms in the UK and the US. The CDs I have, though, are the UK versions. To any fans whose first exposure was the North American versions, don't worry, I'll still be covering those songs, but they'll be on different albums. With that out of the way, it's time to start listening. Let's cut to the chase. The story behind this album's recording is pretty interesting, I think. The choice to do a full studio album in the first place was a risky one. Beatles historian Mark Lewison noted that, while there was a market for full-length albums back in the day, it was dominated mainly by older listeners, with the teenagers who made up the Beatles fan base largely preferring singles. Despite this, producer George Martin insisted that an album was the way to go. He had first considered recording it at a live show the Beatles had scheduled at Liverpool's The Cavern Club, but he deemed the acoustics unsuitable, so he decided the band should take the studio route. With 4 songs having already been released as singles, the remaining 10 were recorded in a single day on February 11th, 1963. As far as my personal opinion goes, I think this is a really good first effort. That being said, it's definitely clear they had a lot of growing to do as far as songwriting. Certain parts of the album feel a little unimportant, such as Love Me Do, which could have been done away with. A great chunk of the album wasn't even written by the Beatles, with 6 of the 14 songs being covers, although given the state of the music world at the time, I won't hold that against them. As far as things I liked, the band's energy is infectious, and it helps make some of the album's slower moments more enjoyable. The vocal harmonies are another aspect I enjoy. Ask Me Why is a great example of this. Given that no one in the band had formal musical training, it's impressive that they were able to harmonize with each other in such a pleasing way. As far as specific highlights go, I Saw Her Standing There works great as the album opener. Chains, which is a cover of a song by American girl group The Cookies, was surprisingly good for a song that I had never heard before. Speaking of covers, Boys, originally performed by the Shirelles, has Ringo singing, which I did not expect to hear. He does a really good job. The best moment of the album for me is the closer, Twist and Shout. The band's energy is at its peak here. You just want to twist and shout along with them. The story behind the recording of the song is great. John Lennon had a cold on the day they did this album, so they did this song last because they knew that, given the way the song is sung, having John sing it in his given state would ruin his voice for the rest of the day. Thankfully, John nailed the vocals on the first take. Knowing that in advance really does make the song a little painful to listen to at times. You can just picture John absolutely straining. Overall, this is a really solid debut album, and after I heard it, I was excited to hear what came next. Before I go on, I should clarify one thing. From here on out, the recording sessions for the album produced a good deal of non-album singles. I don't want to completely disregard them since they include some of their most well-known songs. Because of this, for each album left in their discography, I'll be mentioning the non-album singles that the recording sessions produced. Now that that's out of the way, let's tackle the follow-up to Please Please Me with the Beatles. One of the first things I noticed about this album is its maturity compared to the original. While it's still definitely energetic, it sounds a lot less boy band-ish. The album starts off with 5 consecutive original songs, and each of them is killer. It Won't Be Long has a lot of energy, which makes it a great choice as the album opener. All I've Got to Do brings it down a notch, and is overall just a nice, peaceful song. All My Loving has one of my favorite melodies on the album. I'd actually forgotten what the song was called, so hearing it come on was a pleasant surprise. Don't Bother Me, the only song they let George write, makes a strong case for him being allowed to write more. Little Child has a nice harmonica line, which really lets their folk influences shine through perfectly. Of course, the album also features what the CD booklet describes as a batch of personal choice pieces selected from the recorded repertoires of the American R&B artists they admire most. The 2 covers I enjoyed the most were Please Mr. Postman, which shows off their vocal harmonies masterfully, and Roll Over Beethoven, which has absolutely infectious energy. The single from the recording session, I Want to Hold Your Hand, is... well, what's there to say about it that hasn't already been said? It's a great song. There's a reason it's their best-selling single worldwide. The B-side, This Boy, is a song I hadn't heard before, but I found the melody quite nice. One cool thing about the physical release is that it comes with a packet containing descriptions of each track. I'd imagine you're expected to look through it before listening to increase excitement for what's to come. It also has a section just describing the recording process itself, which is of no interest to anyone that isn't either a Beatles nerd or a nerd. One thing I did find interesting was the explanation as to why the playing quality increased from that on Please Please Me. Apparently, with the Beatles' confidence in the studio having improved, they felt more comfortable discarding takes that were decent, but beneath what they felt they were able to do. Evidently, this increased amount of time was worth it. On with the Beatles, the Fab Four managed to not only avoid a sophomore slump, but surpassed what they had previously put out. Only 9 months later, on July 10th, 1964, the band would put out their most ambitious songwriting venture up to that point. I'm talking about A Hard Day's Night. With A Hard Day's Night, the Beatles did away with the formula they had used on their previous 2 albums, that being 8 originals and 6 covers. Instead, this album is the first of theirs to consist entirely of original compositions. I gotta say, I really like this. It lets their songwriting abilities shine brightly. As most of you probably know, this album was done at the same time the band was filming their first movie, which the album shares its name with. Only the first 7 songs on the album were included in the movie soundtrack, with a CD booklet explaining that including any more would have slowed down the plot. Obviously, the title track is an absolute banger, and starts the record off on a high note. I Should Have Known Better lets their blues influences shine through with a lovely harmonica melody. Even once the 7 movie tracks are finished, the rest of the album doesn't let up. The CD booklet seems to agree with me, saying, "When you listen to the second side of this record, you will agree that it would have been a pity to cast aside such a fabulous set of songs, solely because they couldn't be fitted into the structure of A Hard Day's Night." My favorite songs on the second side are probably Tell Me Why, with its infectious sing-along quality, and I'll Cry Instead, which has a really nice rhythm utilizing the use of tambourines. Interestingly, this is the only album of theirs to consist entirely of songs written by John and Paul. As I said before, this is their first album to not have any covers, but they apparently extended that to mean that George couldn't write anything. Ringo wasn't even in the songwriting picture at this point. I'm not complaining, as I do really enjoy the John-Paul songwriting collaboration. It still would have been nice to have George contribute his one permitted song, as he can definitely write some great stuff. One interesting little tidbit is that this was the first Beatles album to be recorded using 4-track technology, as opposed to the twin-track method used for their previous albums. They would record bass, guitar, and drums into one track, the vocals into another, and the remaining 2 to overdubs. I would say this helps the album a good deal. I particularly like the bongos you can hear on the title track. The Beatles were, at this point, some of the biggest workaholics in the music scene, with this being their 3rd album in 18 months. That's not even mentioning the movie they released. The Beatles would unfortunately not get the break they probably wanted, as after less than 6 months, they had another album to record. That album, Beatles for Sale, would be released on December 4th, 1964. At this point in their career, the Beatles had a nearly non-stop schedule of performing and recording. This understandably left them somewhat exhausted. Thus, when it came time to record Beatles for Sale, only 8 of the 14 tracks were originals, as opposed to A Hard Day's Night, which had all originals. In addition, the album is somewhat darker than those that preceded it. That's not to say it's an overall sad album, but some of the songs are rather introspective in tone. The album starts off with No Reply, which is about not hearing back from your unfaithful girlfriend, followed by I'm a Loser, which is similarly bleak. When the third track, Babies in Black, came on, I was beginning to wonder if the Beatles had gone full-on emo. Luckily, the songs themselves are catchy to listen to, so I'm not going to complain too much. I'll Follow the Sun comes shortly after, and it's a nice peaceful song that brought a smile to my face. As far as covers go, Rock and Roll Music is an amazing rendition of a Chuck Berry classic. It's full of energy, John does an amazing job on the vocals, and I just love it all around. A track in a similar vein is Kansas City, Hey 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 Hey, which is oozing with blues influence. This album doesn't have any George or Ringo written songs, sadly, but Ringo does make an appearance on the song Honey Don't. His vocals fit the upbeat tone of the song quite well, and it was a pleasant surprise to hear. 8 Days a Week is one of the more lyrically positive songs on the album, and its hook and hand-clapping rhythm is infectious. The album was preceded by the single I Feel Fine. My dad has this as one of his ringtones, so I've heard the opening lick multiple times. I was delighted to find out the rest of the song is just as good. The B-side, She's a Woman, isn't quite as good, but it's still definitely a fun song to listen to. Prior to the writing sessions for this album, the band went to New York City and met the one and only Bob Dylan. He influenced the writing of this album in two major ways. First, John and Paul were inspired by his songwriting proficiency and took this as their cue to write more introspective lyrics, as well as to write songs with a greater folk influence. Secondly, and possibly more importantly, he introduced the band to marijuana, although it would take a while for that influence to kick in full force. The original album notes in the CD booklet are quite amusing. When, in a generation or so, a radioactive cigar-smoking child panicking on Saturn asks you what the Beatles affair was all about, did you actually know them? Just play the child a few tracks from this album, and he'll probably understand what it was all about. The kids of AD 2000 will draw from the music much of the same sense of well-being and warmth as we do today. Find it equal parts funny and sad, just how optimistic people from back then were in regard to future technology. Maybe by AD 3000 we'll finally get to Saturn. Beatles for Sale marked a significant milestone in the band's history. It was an album where they demonstrated their ability to write songs in a non-upbeat tone. Up next we have another album completed alongside a movie of the same name. I'm talking about the album I was personally the most looking forward to covering, Help. You might be wondering why I was looking forward to this album the most. You see, when I was young, my family owned the DVD to the Help movie. The movie just hit the right spot for 9-year-old me. And so I associated the album with the great memories of ogling the Beatles' amazing house, or watching Ringo in the Tiger Pit. Good times. Fun fact about the movie, during a scene at an Indian restaurant, George was exposed to sitar music for the first time. I'm sure that won't affect his songwriting in any way. First 7 songs on this album were included in the movie's soundtrack, and no surprise, they're the best songs on the album, with one exception that we'll get to later. The opening title track gets things off on a great foot. The guitar riff is catchy, not to mention John and Paul's vocals interplay with each other perfectly. It doesn't hurt that, from my experience, this song is tons of fun to play on guitar too. The Night Before is a song I had honestly forgotten about, but oh my god, the vocal hook is amazing. Tons of sing-along quality here. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away brings things down a bit tempo-wise, and ends with a really peaceful flute line. I get a lot of folk vibes off this one. I Need You is George's first written song in 2 albums, and he does a nice job writing a catchy tune. It's also his first song experimenting with a volume pedal, fun fact. I really enjoyed the bass line Paul plays. You're Going to Lose That Girl has bongos overlaid, which I think is a really cool touch. Ticket to Ride is an all-around masterpiece. Great guitar, great singing, and a really imaginative drumline from Ringo. Really clever decision to have this play in the movie during the scene at the ski lodge. Ticket to Ride, indeed. As far as the second half of the album goes, I really liked the cover of Johnny Russell's Act Naturally. They let Ringo sing on this one, and his voice fits the country tone of the original. You Like Me Too Much is George's second song for the record, which he probably had to fight tooth and nail for. I really like the groovy rhythm it has, very head-bopping. The best part of the second side is a song I'd heard but forgot was on this album. I'm talking about Yesterday. Overly sappy songs aren't usually my cup of tea, but something about this song just scratches the perfect itch. I really do feel Paul's sorrow and yearning for Yesterday. I usually browse Wikipedia while listening to albums due to my low attention span, but when this song came on, I had to just stop what I was doing and soak it all in. If Beatles for Sale was influenced by the band's Exhaustion, then it's amazing how this album wasn't as well. After all, the band barely took any time off between touring, recording, and filming their best movie. Despite that, this album feels very upbeat, for the most part at least. Interestingly, as the Beatles had previously recorded on no more than a 4-track recorder, they decided to combine the recordings of 2 separate 4-track machines in order to maximize the potential overdubs they could do. If only they knew the potential recording possibilities that GarageBand would eventually provide. With this move, they're able to add even more elements to their songs, such as the string quartet on Yesterday. The Beatles were gradually moving away from the bright-eyed, simplistic innocence of their early days, insofar as musical and lyrical stylings went. However, with their follow-up, they would go even further. Let's talk about Rubber Soul. It can be argued that, up until this point in their discography, each Beatles album was better than the one that preceded it. Rubber Soul, however, is generally considered to have kick-started a new era of the Beatles in terms of songwriting maturity and the variety of instruments used. In terms of the latter, the album features both a sitar and an instrument called a harmonium, which I hadn't previously been aware of. The songwriting was influenced not only by their meeting with Bob Dylan, as mentioned prior, but also by John and George's experimenting with LSD. Is there anything drugs can't do? This was also the first album they did without any outside commitments, be it film or radio. As a result, they were allowed more time to experiment in the studio. One particular thing I like about this album is Paul's bass playing. The bass lines on the prior album definitely fit the songs well, but nothing about them really stood out to me. This album, however, is the first one where I found myself thinking, damn, that's a really good bass line. The opening track, Drive My Car, is a great example of this. Paul going outside the guitar lines to play a nice groovy lick, which he does again on You Won't See Me and The Word. Think for Yourself has him playing what sounds like a fuzz bass, which is a nice touch. As a bass player, I approve of this. Alright, time to talk about the song quality. I've already mentioned Drive My Car, but I want to mention how much I enjoyed it aside from the bass line. As an opening track, it's incredible. It's got great energy, and it made me excited for what the rest of the record would hold. One of the songs I already knew from this album remains possibly my favorite track, Norwegian Wood. I really love the guitar line and how it matches up with the vocal melody. George's sitar playing adds a nice touch as well. Nowhere Man has really pleasing vocal melodies, and I found myself humming along quickly. Doesn't hurt that the instruments are nice too. Michelle is a song that slows it down a little. It's nice and peaceful, and the guitar lick that opens it is really pretty. What Goes On is Ringo's first songwriting credit in the Beatles' discography so far, although he teamed up with John and Paul, so I'm not sure which elements can be attributed to him. He does a good job singing it though. The song has a very country feel to it, which his voice is well suited for. Girl is a song with vocal melodies that I described in my notes as tear-jerking. It's just beautiful. What else can I say? As you've probably found out by now, I'm a sucker for vocal melodies. This album also has a second song written by George, If I Needed Someone. While it's not my favorite song on the record, I think it's really enjoyable, and it hints at a growing interest in Eastern-style melodies. The sessions for this album also produced the single Day Tripper. This is one of the first Beatles songs I really got into when I was young, and I still really love listening to it now. The guitar riff is nice and driving, and you can tell that the band is absolutely giving it their all, vocally speaking. In the CD booklet, it's mentioned how this was the first album where, during the recording process, the band stopped doing morning sessions. Instead, they began lengthening their evening ones, although these would sometimes stretch into the morning hours of the next day. I also think this photo of the band is funny. Apparently they didn't have a drum kit on hand, so for the sake of giving Ringo something to do, they just had him ride a goddamn bike. Rubber Soul saw the Beatles experiment more and more with different ways of songwriting and instrumentation. This was a trend they would only continue on the follow-up, Revolver. Revolver is the first Beatles album that, to me at least, sounds like it was written by an entirely different band than the one that wrote Please Please Me. While Rubber Soul was the first album recorded without the pressure of any outside commitments, Revolver was the first album to be recorded after they stopped performing live. Thus, the band had even more time to experiment, and experiment they did. This didn't apply just to songwriting and instrumentation. They also made heavier use of the recording studio as an instrument. They added in a great deal of song elements they knew couldn't be perfectly replicated live, which they now didn't have to worry about. In addition, while they had experimented with LSD during Rubber Soul, this was the first one where they had started using it regularly. All of this makes for a killer album. The album kicks off with a George song, Taxman. Lyrically, this is their first song to be written about a political topic. Specifically, it was a critique of the British government's tax policy under Prime Minister Harold Wilson of the Labour Party. As far as the actual music goes, this is probably my favorite Paul bass line in their entire discography. It's catchy, stands out from the rest of the instruments, and makes the song so much better. The guitars are still nice, don't get me wrong. As if having a great opening track isn't enough, they follow it up with the one and only Eleanor Rigby. My god, where do I begin with this track? Back when I first heard it, I was a young lad who hadn't heard much music with string sections. Naturally, hearing this song just blew my mind. Hearing it now that I'm grown still blows my mind. Something about the melody, something about the singing, something about the way it's all organized just mesmerizes me. I even find myself humming along to the lyrics. Speaking of the lyrics, I didn't realize how dark they were. I knew they were about all the lonely people, but I didn't pick up the parts about dying and nobody coming to your funeral. It was at this point in writing the script that I realized I'd written an entire paragraph about just 2 songs. So as much as I would like to keep talking about Eleanor Rigby, I'm going to have to move on. I'm Only Sleeping features the first example of cool studio tricks that the band would use on this album. There are several points in the song where reversed guitar notes are played. It's a really cool effect. The rest of the song is nice as well. It's a very low-key vibe. Love You Too is another George song. It features an extended sitar section to start it off, which caught me a bit off guard, but in a good way. This is the first major instance of non-traditional rock instruments being used on the album, and I think it sounds really good. Good Day Sunshine is a song that's a little more cheesy. That being said, I really dug it. A good vocal harmony can save even the cheesiest of songs. And Your Bird Can Sing is another song with a great Paul bass line. It also features a sweet lead guitar line, although let's be honest, it's the bass that really makes it. No, I'm not biased. For No One is an interesting song. With its use of the clavichord and French horn, it has a heavy Baroque influence. Given the weirdness of the album, though, it still fits perfectly in the track listing, and I'm glad they included it. Dr. Robert fits the bill of the one song on every Beatles album that sounds distinctly country. I really like it. The rhythm is driving, and the bass line by Paul provides a great backbone. I Want to Tell You is the third song to let George write, making this album his first songwriting hat trick. The song feels strangely dissonant, with the piano line sounding almost off-key at times. Those of you who have watched my videos before, however, will know that I love well-used dissonance, and this song is no exception. Gotta Get You Into My Life uses horns very effectively. This, combined with Paul's driving bass and passionate vocals, had me swaying my shoulders almost instantaneously. The song feels like it would be right at home on the soundtrack of a rom-com. I do think the chorus is a bit abrupt, just Paul shouting the title of the song and that's it. Oh well, not every song can be perfect. It's also about weed. The closing track, Tomorrow Never Knows, is quite a journey. Many of the songs on this album would have been difficult to perform live due to the vast amount of instruments used. That being said, they could conceivably have at least done a stripped-down version or had guest musicians perform with them. This, however, is not only a song that was never performed live, but couldn't have been. There are multiple reversed and artificially slowed down or sped up guitar lines that would have been impossible to replicate live. It's the first Beatles song that can be best described as disorienting. As with the case for the Rubber Soul CD, the case for Revolver has an unintentionally hilarious photo of the group. So, Ringo, we don't have a drum kit for you to pose with, so just, I don't know, stand in the background or something. Maybe lean against the sculpture if you want. The CD booklet contains some pretty cool information. Apparently on Eleanor Rigby, the band recorded the strings on all 4 tracks of a 4-track recording deck, then played that into 1 track of another recording machine. You'd have thought that someone would have suggested they use an 8-track by now, but nope. In addition, the album apparently took almost 300 hours to record and mix. The days of recording an entire album in a single day were long gone. They've also apparently stopped including the promotional text from the original vinyl sleeve, which is a good thing, since those were getting a little self-indulgent. After I finished listening to Revolver, I felt many emotions. Mainly, I was happy that I had listened to such a great album. I was also excited to listen to and talk about the album that came next. An album that most people would recognize just from the cover alone. Of course, I'm talking about Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.